Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Denise Balch, and I am happy to be with you today to talk about prior authorization. I'm also happy to be joined by Alan Birch, who's the Associate Director of Provider Solutions at Centrex, Gavin Mosley, who's a benefits consultant with Mosley Group Benefits, and Kim Steele, who's the Director of Government and Community Relations, Cystic Fibrosis Canada. As many of you or most of you will already know, my name is Denise Balch. Normally, I'm wearing my Connects Health hat, but today I'm going to be wearing my prior authorization hat as the Executive Director of our new Prior Authorization Framework and Accreditation Program, Inc. So very happy to have you with us today. Let's get started. Got a lot to get through. So I'm going to give you a fair bit of background today on the prior authorization. So we're going to talk just very briefly about the reimbursement environment. We're going to talk about some of the prior authorization research that has been done, particularly the Simplified Prior Authorization Initiative. And some of you may have already been on webinars on the SPA initiative, or you may have read some of the communications that we've sent out or listened to some of the podcasts. I'm going to talk mostly about the prior authorization framework and accreditation program, because that's what you signed up for. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the future, and then we'll have a panel discussion. So during that panel discussion with Alan, Gavin, and Kim, who've been so kind to be on our panel today, you'll also have the opportunity to ask questions of them as well. So we have some prepared questions for them, but you'll also have a chance to do that as well. As I said, I am certainly willing to take questions during the presentation, so feel free to ask them. So I think most of you that have been around the reimbursement environment and group benefits for any period of time will certainly appreciate the graphic here. I like to put in quite a few graphics in my presentations. It keeps me interested, and I hope it keeps you interested and engaged as well. It's a bit like Spaghetti Junction, and what we are trying to do is help make it a little bit less complex. So just a very quick background. Most of you will already know this. We definitely need these specialty drugs that have been around in the marketplace for probably pretty close to, well, more over 20 years now. But right now, there are so many. There's around 500 specialty drugs for serious disabling or life-threatening conditions. And those include things like for conditions like rheumatoid arthritis and inflammatory bowel disease, but there are many others now, including in cancer care, MS, and it's not just specialty drugs that we've really seen. We've seen new blockbuster drugs in the marketplace as well. There are some very traditional management practices to manage the impact of prescription drug claims and other expenses under benefit plans. You'll be familiar with all of the old ones that have been around as long as I've been in the industry, since the early 80s. But now we've been looking at some in the last sort of 20 years or so, since electronic adjudication for non-specialty claims has been a common practice through pharmacy benefit managers. We've seen a much greater ability to manage drug formularies and to manage access to medications. And then prior authorization came into being. And prior authorization is really primarily the purpose is to manage specialty and high volume drugs, including GLP-1. So we often talk about prior authorization and specialty medications, but prior authorization has also been applied in the past to drugs that have high volume. And we certainly see that a good example of that in the GLP-1s that have been available in the marketplace in recent years. And that's really put an incredibly heavy burden on the prior authorization system that we have now. And in many ways, I'm super happy that these products are available, not only because they're helping a lot of people, but also that they've raised the challenges of prior authorization to the forefront. So a little bit of a history lesson before we get into PAFA. This first came very much under my microscope in 2020 when I was hired to do research on private payer prior authorization in Canada. And I partnered with the Pangea Group, and I think Bev Herzig's on the line. She and I worked diligently to develop that report, and we went out to a number of stakeholders that are involved in the prior authorization space, and we were able to get what I think is a pretty accurate picture of some of the challenges and opportunities within prior authorization. So very simply, the PA environment is quite complex. There are multiple stakeholders that are involved from the time that the prescriber writes that prescription for the patient to the time that that patient receives the product. And the process right now, I think most people would agree, is complex and burdensome. So we have not only that growth with over 500 specialty drugs, and many of which are actually paid by the public sector. So those don't all land in the private sector, but still there's a whole process for prior authorization on the public side as well, called special authorization in most cases. We've got a paper-based system. This impacts physicians. It's a challenge for electronic medical records as well. It impacts the patient, obviously. There are public and private payers that all have their unique criteria and their unique process for claiming. And we have a whole industry that's been built around coordinating claims through patient access, and on the public side, drug access navigators, which was originally the domain of oncology, but we now see drug access navigators cropping up in diseases like MS and other areas as well. We also have compassionate programs, which are funded by the pharmaceutical industry, that often provide an initial supply of medication for an individual that needs it, following their doctor's prescription until the time that they're approved by their insurer. Sometimes these programs aren't very popular with insurers, but they certainly provide a very value-added service to patients. And the biggest problem really in the whole system, and where we think we can really have an impact without interfering with a payer's unique criteria, which we know is a no-go zone, is the paper-based prior authorization process. So that's really been the focus of our work. So when we look at the current claims administration and reimbursement challenge, today, as I said, it is a very complex process, and it is a manual process. So, I put the clock there because it takes a long time. And on the left of the screen, you'll see that that paper form completion requires the patient, the physician, along with their medical records, and often their own staff, as well as a patient assistance or drug access navigator service. So all those people have to work together with paper claim forms. Those claim forms have to be faxed or mailed, and you have to kind of hope that the fax machine hasn't run out of paper. And then the insurer receives those by fax or mail. And then the insurer or the payer, because it can be more than just an insurer, could be a PBM as well or other agency, then they may go back and forth by mail or fax for any additional information or questions that they need. And there's also a whole bunch of claim forms in this process as well. So claim form by Sun Life may be different than Manulife or Canada Life or Beneva. And so this, of course, adds complexity to the system. So we have a large financial burden of prior authorization management for insurers and other payers. So they're hiring people to look after managing these prior auth claims. I have it on good authority that, not surprisingly, with the introduction and very high uptake of GLP-1s, that there's been a lot of hiring amongst payers to manage those GLP-1 claims and put them through a prior auth process. It also puts a high administrative burden on patients, medical practitioners, and patient navigators. And there is some variation in criteria and how criteria is used to evaluate PA meds, assessing patient eligibility. And there are some other issues like inconsistent grandfathering provisions on change of carrier. In other words, there really aren't any. I think that's going to be changing soon, but I don't think it's for public release yet, but I think we'll see some change in there shortly, and carriers will agree to prior auth grandfathering provisions. Also, we look at the physical and mental health impact of patients who've prescribed to prior auth drugs. Those who are waiting extended time for medications, they may be off work because they're not able to be at work, or may not be able to fully perform at their optimal when they are at work. It's very stressful waiting for access to these important and often life-changing or life-saving medications. So when we look for opportunities for improvements in prior authorization, we really are looking at the reduction in the use of paper, so mail and fax, reducing that administrative burden on insurers, patients, physicians, and drug access navigators and patient support programs, and reducing that wait time for patients for a drug that in most cases, but not all, they are eligible to receive once their application has been reviewed. We also think that there's opportunities to simplify that patient assessment of their eligibility, and again, those inconsistent grandfathering provisions. So criteria, as I mentioned, we understood at the outset that that was a non-negotiable, and there have been some initiatives that have tried to get some consistency between payers that have involved standardizing claim forms or standardizing criteria that have fallen flat on their faces. So we did go in with the knowledge that there were going to be limitations to the impact that we could have. So the white paper recommendations for simplified prior authorization were to create a patient-centric PA process that better serves the needs of patients. And we were largely proposed to do that through advocacy. We thought it was important to create some consensus on some standardization between private payers, again, mostly from an administrative perspective in terms of the actual process, and expediting the claims process to reduce the administrative burden as well. And we thought it was important to provide a central web portal, really dedicating to advocating for simplifying the PA process, to educating stakeholders about prior authorization, to give them some plain language information, and really to help serve the best needs of patients and their need for information on navigating the process. So those of you who know me know I talk a lot usually, but I've been on the phone since 10 a.m. and so my throat is telling me it's not happy. So just a sec. We also thought it was important, and there was an opportunity to develop standards for annual reporting so that there was some better understanding of the prior authorization, basically the outcomes. So approvals, declines, appeals, things like that, and other information that would be useful in the marketplace. Not pinpointing any one carrier, but just getting an overall sense of the state of prior authorization. Also, we wanted to look at an accreditation and recognition program for private payers, and actually that's now extended to public payers who achieve and maintain best practices. Some don't like to use that word, but let's use it for today or for right now. Maintain best practices, looking at some cost benefit metrics and stakeholder evaluations so that there was really a much more public face to prior authorization so that everybody could understand what some of the challenges were specifically so that they could be addressed if at all possible. And so that was really a summary of the simplified prior authorization white paper. and the recommendations from it. You can find the white paper and download it on the Simplified Prior Auth website, because of course that was one of the things that we actually did as a result. So again, the role of simplified prior authorization, just to kind of illustrate it, make it a little bit easier to get your head around, is to educate, to advocate, to engage, to help create solutions or facilitate solutions, because we aren't actually a provider of a service other than education and information and advocacy, and to really help drive stakeholders to action to improve the process for everyone. And so the deliverables since the Simplified Prior Authorization Initiative was developed, and after the white paper, we did get a lot of additional support from stakeholders that were concerned about the process that allowed us to move forward with a number of initiatives. The financial support was largely from pharma, but not exclusively. So the deliverables were really to advocate for change, and we've done that through meetings, one-on-one meetings, blogs, podcasts, articles in the benefits press, presentations and webinars, and we continue to do that. We did do a market study to identify and to explore EAP solutions providers. Now, when we did that, there was no one with a perfect solution, but based on the information that we put out there and what we got back, OKRX was identified as a preferred solutions provider. We did have quite an extensive market study. We had a working group that consisted of experts in patient support and prior authorization adjudication. So we did go to quite some lengths to conduct that market study. We also developed that online education resource, which I mentioned earlier. That is in English, it is in French, and it is meets accessibility standards as well. And then the last piece of the puzzle was the development of that accreditation and recognition framework. And so the last deliverable was completed and launched in October 2024, which is really what we're here primarily to discuss today, and that is the development of the prior authorization framework and accreditation program. What I will say just briefly on EPA is that what we really hope in an electronic prior authorization is we can help move the needle forward, whether it's with OKRX or another provider. What we're seeing right now is that there are a number of forms that are already online that unfortunately right now, the electronic submission to insurers, so the application processing, I think, interface API, I may be wrong on that summary, but is not in place to get that claim electronically to the insurer. So it still has to go by fax or mail. But in terms of the green circle with the patient, physician, and patient assistance, in many cases and for many forms now, they can actually be completed online with e-signatures, and that then can be sent to insurers. And that saves about 70% of time in the actual preparation of claims to the insurer. And there was a study done on that. So that's from actual research that was done. So let's take a look at the prior authorization framework and accreditation program. We spent a lot of time last year. It was the second half of last year. It was a big job to develop the guide. I'm going to talk about how we did that. You can download the guide on the prior auth website, which is priorauthframework.ca. So this is an outline of what we're going to discuss today about prior auth, the prior auth program, or PAFA as we call it, and then the outline of session 2 and 3 and what we're actually going to talk about then. So in session 1 today, we're going to talk about what PAFA is, the goals, management and oversight, how the program and guide were developed and who participated in that, take a quick look at the program guide itself in terms of what areas are covered under the guide and who can become a member and who can become accredited, who benefits, and I'll talk a little bit about what you can do. In session number 2, we're going to do a bit more of a deep dive into the guide. We're going to talk in more detail about the guiding principles and very specifically about what is required to become a payer member, because there are some requirements. There are some things that payers have to do in order to become members. We're going to talk about who's on the advisory panel. We had our first meeting. We're not quite fully staffed yet on our volunteer advisory panel, but we're getting close. Then we'll talk in a bit more of a deep dive about the accreditation process and our accreditation panel. And again, we'll have a panel discussion, just like today. And in the third session, which is on February 27th, we'll be looking at the framework in more detail in terms of the administration framework and the EPA framework. And then we'll be talking about reporting and the industry survey. And again, a panel discussion. So that gives you an overview of what we'll be discussing. So down to the nitty-gritty, what you're here for. What is PAFA? Well, first of all, I'd like to say it's a Canadian nonprofit. So in these days, I'm proud to say it's Canadian. It is a nonprofit, and the reason for that is that we heard from payers in our discussion that to really have credibility in the marketplace, that PAFA needed to be nonprofit, or any group needed to be nonprofit that was doing any kind of accreditation or review. So that's what we did. I own it right now. That's not to say that that's going to happen in perpetuity. Those of you who know me know I've been in the business since the early 1980s, and so it's getting close to my retirement time. It was developed by my organization and my team with support from the Simplify Prior Authorization Initiative Working Group, and both Gavin and Alan are part of that working group, as well as prior input from other prior authorization stakeholders. It is a framework that lays out efficiencies in prior, or as the public sector often calls it, special authorization, administration processes and practices, and an accreditation process to recognize payers who adopt efficiencies in Canada, both on the public and private side. So I've tried to, just in case you do download the guide, what I've tried to do is give you some page numbers because it is a pretty hefty document. It didn't start out that way, but it kind of ended up that way. So what is the goal of the prior auth framework? Well, it's to engage payers to make positive changes in their claims processes and practices through a membership and an accreditation program. And I feel like I should have a little box on the side saying it's not. It's not an organization that's going to tell a payer and dictate what their criteria should be. That's not what we're going to do. We have no interest in doing that. We know payers won't accept that. And so that is a discussion that is off the table. The other part of the goal that we have is to improve the PA experience for patients and other stakeholders by reducing administration and the time for claims processing and the overall prior authorization experience. So it's not just about time to claims processing, but that's a lot of it, but it's also about that overall experience. And we definitely saw that when we did the Simplify Prior Auth research, we definitely found that there was a lot of confusion. Stakeholders, particularly patients and physicians, were concerned that the information they needed to get that claim submitted was not available to them. It was hard to find claim forms, and it was hard to find out what the actual process was. So in return for that goal and for payers that go down this road, we will recognize Canadian public and private payers who've adopted efficiencies in their PA claims processes and practices through membership. So anybody who joins as a member, any organization that joins, is recognized on our website and in our communications and publicly through social media, and accreditation. So there are 2 levels of accreditation, as I mentioned, and we'll be going into those in a little bit more detail later on, but more importantly in the last webinar. So payers achieve administrative efficiencies in the PAFA framework through time savings of cost and reduced duplication of errors. And so there definitely are benefits for them. And private payers differentiate themselves from their competitors and achieve a competitive advantage in the marketplace. So my goal, and you'll see the different branding as we go through the presentation, my goal is for the PAFA to be a designation, either as a member or an accredited member, that advisors, and there are many advisors on the line today, and plan sponsors are looking for when they're renewing their plan or they're going out to market. So as advisors, this webinar is particularly a call out to say, start asking your insurers, your payers, are you accredited? Are you a member? Well, accreditation isn't actually available yet, so I guess you don't have to ask that yet, but you will later this year, after probably Q2. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But you should be asking your payer, your insurer, are you a member? Do you support the overall goals and guiding principles of the prior auth work framework and accreditation program? And I do have a quick question or comment from Tim Clark. So I'm just going to finish up my thought here. Most of this is found on page 3 of the guide. And you'll notice that payers achieve administrative efficiencies. That means both public and private. And private payers can differentiate themselves from their competitors. We don't see a lot of competition on the public sector. I'm just going to look over to my second screen, and question says, I'd love some clarity on what exactly OKRX's role is. Does a payer need to work with them to be accredited? The answer is no. Are you looking for other vendors, etc.? It's not my decision to look for other vendors. Just trying to clarify if they are one of the potential PAFA vendors or if they are the only PAFA vendors. Okay, we any organization, whether it's OKRX or Xeta or any other PAFA, or sorry, any other EPA vendor or solutions provider, we have is not associated with PAFA. In terms of we don't contract with a solutions provider for EPA. So it's kind of a moot point because we don't contract them directly. That's up to a payer to look at the options available to them and then decide which EPA solutions provider that they would like to work with. So that's nothing to do with us, except that from the SPA perspective, we did do a market study. And at that time that we did that market study, which was a couple years ago now, we thought that OKRX was the best solutions provider at that time. So hopefully that answers your question. So in terms of management and oversight, so as of right now, I am the owner and the executive director. We do have a board of directors. The minimum requirement in Canada for a nonprofit is for 3 directors. And so those directors are myself, John Anaclato, who you will know that, for those of you that know him, knows that he is a health economist by training and has a lot of experience in prior authorization with McKesson. And he's now an independent consultant. So that was a good fit for us. And then we also have a lawyer on our board of directors. We have to have a minimum of 3. At some point in the future, we may find that we want to expand that board, which I'm certainly open to. The Framework and Accreditation Advisory Board, or FAB, that maintains the framework and accreditation requirements. And we're going to go into more of who's on that board and what their roles and responsibilities are in the next session. That number is 9. Again, these can be changed, but right now we thought 9 was a good number because we wanted to have a payer, non-payer stakeholder mix with patient representation on that advisory board. So that advisory board is close to being filled. We do have 2 spots that I've kept open for insurers or payers. We're just in the process of socializing the PAFA program more widely across the industry. So there will be, it will take some time, but we do have some early interest from payers in participating as members and on the advisory board. So you can stay tuned to this channel. There's also will be an accreditation review panel, and we're in the process of looking at potential candidates now. There will be 5 people on that, and I would say that I'm one of the 5 and I'm one of the 9. And this group will review accreditation applications and award accreditation. There is, this will be a non-payer stakeholder mix. So no payers will be on this accreditation review panel for confidentiality reasons. How was the PFA program and the guide developed? Well, there was a core team, primarily myself and one of my staff, Radia Karodia, who's a part-time researcher and educator with Connects Health, and she has a master's in global health. And of course, I should have mentioned I should have mentioned Nathan Smofsky, who of course is our IT manager, and he did a lot of work on the actual logistics of getting the website and the guide up and running, and also Rebecca Westcott, who was our graphic designer and helped us manage the website and the guide as well. But from a technical perspective, in terms of the content, it was mostly Radia and myself. We also had participation by a working group of 6 from the Simplified Prior Authorization Initiative that included representation from advisors, patient support, pharmacy, including, as I've said, Gavin Mosley, pardon me, and Alan Birch, and NFP Mosley, Jones Delorier, Innomar Strategies. Sorry, I missed Centrex out here. Sorry, I'll add that in later, Alan. We also had a larger review group of 28 from the insurer community, advisors, patient support, patient group, independent consultants, pharmacy, technology solutions providers, pharmaceuticals, and physicians. So we did have a broad cross-section for our review group, and we go into a little bit more detail on the guide, on who participated in development. I just didn't put the page number in there. And in terms of what we actually used from a research perspective, we looked at multiple research sources. They are listed in Appendix 2 of the PAFA guide. And we looked at public electronic prior authorization payers in Canada, which is right now BC and Ontario. We looked at US state and federal legislation, US Healthcare and Medical Association position papers, and there was a number of those, EU legislation, and we looked a little bit at Australia's public payer system as well. So all of that information was gathered, and actually I should say that after the initial review group of the 28, we did go back to a smaller number for a final review before the guide was finalized. So what I've done is listed the sections that are in the guide, and I'll speak to those briefly. There's a bit of a backgrounder which talks a little bit about simplified prior auth and some of the issues generally in the industry around reimbursement. Excuse me. We also There are, I haven't listed them here because it's not in a section per se, but it's its own section. But there are all also 4 values in terms of how the organization itself operates, the PAFA program operates. So we have 4 fundamental values that we must operate under. There are 4 guiding principles, which is an external requirement for membership, a commitment to these 4 guiding principles for membership and associate membership, communication, transparency, fairness, consistency, and efficiency in prior authorization. And then we have the industry framework that's outlined in the guide. We talk about administrative efficiencies. We actually have, it's quite a lot of information on aspects of administration to create efficiencies and basically minimum standard practices to ensure fair treatment of patients and other stakeholders. And then there's the gold level of accreditation, which is when an organization has achieved both administrative efficiencies and EPA accreditation. Some of you may be wondering why or if somebody, an organization achieves EPA accreditation, whether administration is actually even relevant. But I think once we go through the framework and accreditation in more detail, or if you download the guide and look at it yourself, you'll see that there are actually, it's important to achieve both the administrative efficiencies and the EPA portion of the framework and accreditation. So how to apply, we also look at membership and accreditation. So just to be really clear, there's 2 levels of membership, which we're going to talk about in a moment. And we'll go into more detail in the second webinar, but there is membership and only payers can be members, and there's associate membership, and that's for non-payers. So we talk about how to apply, and actually the membership and associate member forms are actually available on the website. That's how you apply. It's online and it can be printed off afterwards, but it is an online application. We talk about reporting and the type of reporting that we're going to be doing. And again, we'll go into that in more detail at a future webinar. Then we also talk about patients, caregivers, prescribers, plan advisors, and plan sponsors. And really this section talks about how to use the guide and what the PAFA program can do for these groups. So there are some hints for plan advisors on things like asking your payers or your insurers, are you accredited? Are you a member? And some other questions around prior authorization. There's also a definition section and a glossary of terms so that everybody knows what on earth we're talking about. And there's several appendices. So there is information on the working group members and the guide reviewers. There is the research that I've already talked about. There's the framework and accreditation panelists. That's to be completed because we haven't put all of that in yet. And there is a sample payer commitment to the PAFA guiding principles and the patient experience survey, just some sample questions, the types of things that we'll be looking at when we get to that patient experience survey. So who can become a member and become accredited? So as I said earlier, payers can become members. They can also sit on the Framework and Accreditation Advisory Board and become accredited. So to become a member, they have to meet membership requirements, which includes a demonstrated commitment to the guiding principles of communication, transparency, and fairness, consistency, and efficiency. And non-payers can also sit on the FAAB, the advisory board, and become associate members. They can also sit on the accreditation panel as well. So to become an associate member, non-payers have to meet the membership requirements, including written support of the PAFA guiding principles. And that's outlined on page 12. So the membership and recognition, you can see our nice little branding here. The membership in the program is for payers who agree to the guiding principles, as I mentioned, and then the recognition through accreditation is evidence that a payer has adopted the practices and processes in the framework. And again, you can download the guide, but really that just gives you an idea of what that branding looks like. And then, of course, a payer or a payer member, an associate member, and any organization that becomes accredited can use this branding on all of their materials as well, including their websites. So a little bit more, we're going to go into detail, as I said, in webinar number 3, but just to give you a bit of a teaser, in terms of the administrative efficiencies, if you look at the guide, what you'll find is some comments and requirements regarding the PA advisory committee that payers have, and some of the basic requirements for that. Information that's available to patients and other stakeholders, communication, approval, changes of medication, denials, change of carrier, patient evaluations, key performance indicators reporting, and timelines. So all of that is in the guide under the administrative efficiencies accreditation area. For electronic prior authorization, it's a little bit more high level. But we do talk about online claim forms and completion and submission of claims online, accessibility, which is important for any of you that aren't aware. There are heavy fines into the 6 figures for those companies whose online documents and websites are not accessible. Particularly, when you're reaching out to individual patients, and which is one of the reasons why the simplified prior auth site is accessible. The PAFA site right now is not accessible, but we will be working on that in 2025. We were on a bit of a time crunch, so it does take a little bit more time to develop that accessible component. And we will be looking to for EPA for patient evaluations and some key performance indicators and reporting. And then, as I mentioned, once an organization achieves both the admin and the EPA accreditation, then they will be awarded the gold accreditation standard, which will be the highest standards. So, I'm often asked this question, well, who really benefits? Well, really and Bev will agree with me on this, on the Simplified Prior Authorization Initiative, the key focus was, how can we make this better for patients? But really, when there are improvements in prior authorization, patients will find the process more easier. There'll be a more transparent claims process, and there'll be shorter times to access their medication. We're not asking for patients to receive medications that they shouldn't be getting. We're just asking that patients receive them in a more timely fashion. And sometimes this is happening right now. So I don't want to paint every claim with the same brush, but many times there can be long waits. And this is very hard on patients and their families and their employers. For physicians in pharmacy, we're talking less time spent on claim forms and more time with patients. One of our advisory board panelists is a rheumatologist and the private payer representative for the Ontario Rheumatologists Association. And I've done podcasts with him and we touch base, pretty regularly. And he definitely spends a significant part of his work week, much more than he should be, on claim forms and filling out documents and answering questions from insurance companies and other payers. So we really need to make sure that they spend less time on claim forms. CLIA has had a very strong mandate on this. They're making disability claim forms much easier. They will be going to one common claim form in the future. That's been agreed upon. And we really need to do a better job of alleviating that physician burden. And it's also a burden on pharmacy as well. Patient support, this will help them out. When we initially talked about improving prior auth, some of the responses we received were kind of surprising, which is, well, the support programs aren't going to want this because they're not going to make as much money. Well, I would argue that with the increasing volumes of products that require prior authorization, the patient support programs have no problems with making money, that they have no problems with worrying about job loss, that they will benefit too from a clear, simplified process. There'll be less frustration, less worry for them, and quicker access for their patients to the medication. And from a payer perspective, both public and private, we're really looking at a lower administrative burden, resulting in lower costs. And we know that there's always cost pressures on group benefits. And certainly by improving the administrative efficiency of this process, we can look at not just a quicker turnaround time, but lower costs and a real competitive advantage. So we think that there's, a really strong story and positive story to actively participating in the prior authorization advisory board. They'll have that opportunity to do that and the opportunity for accreditation. So we're definitely, and we'll talk about this in a minute, looking at a collaborative approach to this program. And from those who decide to come on board as associate members, you're really supporting positive change in prior authorization and payer recognition. Associate membership is available to non-payers, as I've already said, and you can participate, or some of you would be able to participate in the advisory board or on the accreditation panel. And obviously there will be criteria for those who actually do participate. But there are limited spots available. But I would suggest that this program has the opportunity to really give an incentive to payers to jump on board to improve their prior authorization process and also benefit from administrative efficiencies and cost savings. So what on earth are we going to do from here on in? Well, apart from the 2 other webinars that I really hope you'll attend so we can dive a little bit deeper, I will just do a bit of a recap. So in October, we launched the guide and the website. I would say it was with Herculean effort that my tiny team of 4 pulled this off with the support, obviously, of the people on the line today, our panelists, and also a wider group of stakeholders. And we've done some external communications to communicate out in bite-sized pieces what the program is, what's in the guide, and we're going to be continuing to do that, and we will be reissuing some of those messages as well to capture the people that we haven't caught the first time around. In 2025, the second quarter, we are working on the accreditation forms. I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. I'd like to have them done in March, but it may not be till April, May, but they will definitely be online and available before we all break for the summer. We also need to get that accreditation panel accepting accreditation applications. So once those accreditation forms are available, then that accreditation panel will be ready to go. And in the fall or the summer of the fall, we'll be looking at the first annual industry prior auth survey. There will be additional reporting once we actually have some members that have become accredited, but that first annual industry prior auth survey will be collaborating with support from Simplified Prior Auth on that as well. And later in the year, we will be making the announcement of the first payers who are moving through the accreditation process and have achieved accreditation. I'm in here for the long term, even though I am retiring in a few years, but This is a long-term game. And so I'm going to stick with this until we're successful. But the early feedback I've had has been very positive. So just closing up here, I actually think I'm going to be finished right about on time, which is fantastic. In terms of the future, I really think that the pieces of improving prior authorization are beginning to come together. So this is back in 2023. So I realize that it's almost 2 years, but even 2 years ago, things changed from 2020. So when we first started out with the SPA initiative and the white paper, private payers told us, and we heard, that change was not needed, that everything was working fine, patients were happy, there was no problem. Fast forward to 2023, payers now agree with the need for a move to EPA and improvements in the prior authorization process. So much so that I managed to wangle a quote out of Joan Weir and get her okay to publish that. And that private payers in Canada recognize the need to move to digitization of a number of insurance processes that remain paper-based, including EPA. The benefits for all stakeholders are high, and at a time when access to medical resources can be difficult, help relieve the overall healthcare administrative burden. So I think that when you get something like that coming from the CLHIA, they don't say anything unless there's a consensus. I also know that at Northwinds this last fall, that there was a lot of discussion about EPA, and it seems to be much higher on the agenda than it was even in 2023. So I think that that bodes well. So just looking back on this slide that I showed earlier, I think I actually meant to take that slide earlier out, but from the earlier place in the deck. But regardless, we know that even just creating an online platform for the form completion side of thing saves about 70% of the time in completing a claim form, rather than having claim forms go back and forth before they're sent to the payer. So just imagine how much time we could save if those claim forms were then able to be submitted to the insurer, and if the insurer could then go back and forth with the physician or the patient assistance program to get any additional information that was required. And then some of those processes could be automated. So just think about how much time could be saved. So if we look at online form completion, submission, receipt, and response, this is really a picture of where we need to be. That application processing interface needs to be in place. And this is very commonplace for two pieces of software to talk to each other. And that's really what we need to have happen, and what is actually being worked on actively as we speak. So for those of you that didn't hear, in June of 2024, OKRX and Green Shield were awarded a significant grant for EPA development by the Canadian Medical Association Foundation and their partners, Scotiabank, MD Financial Group, for the launch of electronic prior authorization in Canada, including integration with electronic medical records. Now, OKRX has done some of that already, but my last update from OKRX, which was about a week ago, is there are some new features within the EPA platform that are being built, and I think that we can, I think we'll probably see that Green Shield and OKRX will come out with the first EPA workable EPA platform that's being actively used. The timeline for that, I'm not sure. I don't have an update on that, and even if I did, I wouldn't be able to say anything. But I think it's great news to see that we have that partnership between OKRX and Green Shield. So finally, I would just say that all stakeholders, the ones you see listed here and others that are involved or have exposure to prior authorization, they do need to work together to create positive change. And what I would like to say is I definitely see PAFA as a collaborative initiative That's why we have the advisory board, and I have my 2 spots saved for insurers. We didn't get a lot of participation from insurers on the actual guide. I think they were a little bit afraid. I don't usually, inspire fear in people, but I think they were a bit nervous. But I think now that they've had a chance to look through the guide, I am getting some interest. I think that recognition program is going to be a great opportunity to really showcase how they can really provide excellent service and excellence to people that really need it the most when they're prescribed specialty medication. So with that, just a reminder about the upcoming webinars and what we'll be discussing. And this is my prior auth email address. You'll find us on LinkedIn. Please follow us on LinkedIn. I do try and share those and repost through my personal account, but we are trying to get that prior auth account followed so that we can make sure that you get the information that you need. And with that, I'd like to thank everybody. I'm only 2 minutes late, which is pretty darn good. I'd like to thank all of you for your attention, Tim for his question. I hope I explained that properly. It wasn't one I expected, so I was scrambling a little bit, but I hope I answered that sufficiently. And I would like to change over and have our panelists join us, Alan, Gavin, and Kim. Just while we're doing that, I would just like to give a little bit of an introduction to each of them. I know I just gave a brief one previously. You would have received the agenda in your email this morning just before we started, and we have bios for each of them. But I will say, and I would like to share that Alan is the Associate Director of Provider Solutions for Oncology at Centrix, and he spent 13 years working in cancer care. He's a former drug navigator, drug access navigator, and the founder of Drug Access Canada, which you can find at drugaccess.ca. And he's been with Centrix since 2021, where he manages the Haven Oncology Patient Support Program. Gavin Mosley has had some personal experience as an advisor with prior authorization, and so he knows some of the challenges that patients run into. And he runs his own boutique consulting firm, and as well as an insurtech firm named the Group Benefits Platform. And Kim Steele is the Director of Governance and Community Relations with Cystic Fibrosis Canada, and she's been working in government and community engagements for 25 years. She's got cross-Canada experience in public policy and strategic partnerships in charities, and has a very impressive background working with patient groups and in the public and private sector. So thanks everybody for being here today. Welcome. And I think maybe I can just give people a reminder that the chat box is open. I actually have it up here on my screen, so I can keep, I'll just move it over to keep it heads up on the screen for questions. But maybe what I'll do is I'll start off, because neither Kim, Gavin, or Alan has heard that presentation, and I certainly appreciate hearing your comments, feedback, and thoughts on the presentation. Can you see what I can see in terms of not just the deck, but your faces? Can you see that on the shared screen that I have, or is that? No? Okay, that's good. Okay, that's fine. I just know which camera to look at. That's all. Now I know what it's like to be a news anchor. This can be challenging. So can you, maybe Alan, I could start with you. Do you think, I mean, you've been involved from the get-go really for Simplified Prior Auth and PAFA. So do you think I fairly represented kind of the work that we've been doing and our objectives? And did I leave anything out? Because if I did, I'm happy for you to fill in the gaps for me.
Sure. No, I think you covered a lot of the items that we've been discussing over the years around moving to an electronic platform for prior authorizations, and a lot of the reasons why. From my background as a healthcare provider in oncology, a lot of the stuff is really resonates with my experience doing prior authorizations for cancer patients. There's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of room for improvement, for standardization, and moving to electronic has a lot of benefits for data collection and efficiencies for data entry. So yeah, I think you covered it all. It's definitely something that we need to do.
That's great. Thanks very much. And I'm sure there's, we're going to get into the nitty gritty in the next two webinars, but I did think it was a really important to give a sort of an overview of kind of where we've come, where we are right now, and kind of what I hope is I hope we've done a really good job of putting in place checks and balances in not only developing the guide, but also in managing the actual program so that not just payers, but also non-payers feel comfortable that we're fighting the good fight and we're heading in the right direction with good management in the process. I'm going to go to Gavin next because Gavin, you've also been involved for quite a while on simplified prior auth. So you come from it from the advisor perspective. So you might want to even share your experiences with prior auth because I don't think you're going to be unique in what you've experienced.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, this year is my 20th year in the industry, which is exciting. And so when I started, um, prior auth was kind of there, but not as much as it is today.
Yeah.
And all of these claims are very sensitive and sometimes highly urgent. And so, we are sought after to jump in the ring, on some of these situations. And we've all different sorts of people we work with, some who are comfortable with technology, some who do well filling out an insurance form, and some who need hand holding from start to finish. And the advisor role, depending on the size of the company, we're 2 feet in with these patients sometimes. And my anecdotal experience is that, especially with some of the fiery ones, I mean, the worst case scenario is somebody has a serious diagnosis. They show up to a pharmacy. They're told they need to take this drug now. They have no idea about anything, and they're told not covered. And they don't know why. They don't understand. They don't even know what prior authorization means. They're scared, and they're told by a pharmacist that there's thousands of dollars they need to pay to get a drug. And so it's time for change. The industry needs to modernize. It brings me back to my first couple of years in the end. Not everybody did e-claims, even for massage claims and things like that. And a couple of insurance companies were waiting. We can do e-claims. If you work with us, you can do a claim online. And
Yeah.
those carriers
I
start
remember
getting,
those days.
sure, of course, right? And so to me, this is just round two, right? And it's just,
Totally.
soon of course they're all going to have electronic prior auth, but like now we're back to where we were. Could we submit a massage or a physio claim online? We're there just for these big high cost drugs.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I see it as a no-brainer myself, but I think we're dealing with a lot of legacy systems still within insurers, and you've worked for insurers, as have I, you more recently, Gavin, and not everybody's platforms are flexible enough to make this relatively straightforward. In fact, even Green Shield, who has a pretty new platform, there's a lot to think about in this. So it does take time, but I think it's well worth the effort. Kim, you haven't been on our involved in our SPA initiative, but you and I have had kind of an ongoing dialogue about the challenges. And of course, you see patients and you speak to patients every day. So maybe you can give me a bit of feedback on the presentation, what you thought, if there were any things missing, and tell us a little bit about your experiences as well.
Yeah, thanks, Denise, and thanks for including the patient voice on the panel. Yeah, I'm so excited about this initiative. It has come a really long way since I think you and I first spoke about it. And I'll say this: when Trikafta, which I'm sure many of you in the room are familiar with, it's a life-changing and in some cases life-saving drug for cystic fibrosis that treats the basic defect of the disease. It's also quite expensive, but it has tremendous efficacy. And so when this drug became approved in Canada in 2021, one of the key issues that people were facing in accessing it was prior authorization. And it was a real, this is a non-technical term, mishmash, and we get the calls, and I did a number of case studies with patients, and I'll be honest, I was kind of horrified by the experience that some people were going through. I mean, the $5,000 at the counter, like this is all very familiar to anyone who needs access to a very expensive therapy. And I think one of the beautiful things that prior authorization, the simplified prior authorization does, PAFA, is it does really reduce that time, and it improves communications. And that's where there was a big problem. It was
Yeah,
taking some people, 6 to 8 weeks to kind of get through that appeal,
yeah.
denial process. And so it's come a long way. I think it's going to add tremendous value to the patient experience, and hopefully, as you said, will expedite things and make them clearer.
That's great. Thanks, Kim. And I think you do bring up a really good point, which I tried to make sure that people left with, which is that the reason that there are two areas of accreditation, and the reason why they're split up is that it's not just about EPA. There are lots of other things before EPA happens, before it's available, but even when EPA is available, there's still lots that needs to be done. And a lot of it is around communication and understanding. Gavin said it best, like people don't even know what prior auth is. Like, I mean, we do, but people barely understand their group benefit plan, let alone that some drugs require, we are not directly adjudicated at the pharmacy counter. So, I think you've all brought home good points, and I know that Alan's got some really great stories about, not happy stories, but some of the challenges that he faced as a drug access navigator, and I'm sure that he sees in the program that he manages now for Centrex. Do you want to say anything about that, Alan? You didn't really get a chance earlier.
Oh, I don't want to go off on a tangent.
Okay.
But yeah, I do have a lot of experience with filling out prior authorization forms, and just to echo what everyone said, a lot of patients had no idea that these things existed. They thought I pay a premium for my drug or for my plan. I should just go to the pharmacy and it's covered. That was kind of the general feeling. They had no idea that there was forms and someone had to approve their drug, right? So it's quite blindsiding to a patient who thinks I'm going to start on my drug today or tomorrow, but you're actually going to have to wait a few weeks minimum to start on that drug. So my patients at least often would spend that time worrying, am I going to get it approved? It's up in limbo right now. And when you're newly diagnosed with a cancer and having to wait a few weeks just sitting there, am I going to get the drug that I was promised or the drug that would be best for my cancer? And you don't know, right? It's really up to somebody adjudicating that and making that decision as to the future of your life, really. It's very scary
Yeah.
for people.
Yeah, no, I can't even imagine how scary that would be. And you're worried about your own diagnosis, and then you're worried about how you're going to pay the mortgage, if you're going to be off work for a while, and then you're worrying about how you're going to afford this drug as well. Maybe I can ask the panel, if in the last few years, I mean, I've sort of reviewed some of the steps that the industry has taken towards electronic prior authorization. We know nobody's up and running, but we do know that at least the forms that are on OKRX's system, that form library, and I think, Alan, you've had done some work with OKRX on that too, that we know that those, as I said, can be completed between the patient support, the physician, and the patient. Those can be done electronically, even though they have to still be submitted by fax or mail to the payer, to the insurer. But other than that, from the admin side, has anything really changed in the last 4 or 5 years since that white paper was initially released? Is it getting better or worse?
I can jump in.
Oh yeah, it's
Yeah.
open to any one of
Sure.
you.
Well, from my perspective, at least, like we deal with public and private patients, and the private side, I would say, I don't know if you guys will agree, but there really hasn't been much change except for the
Mhm.
start of things like Oxida and OKRX. But on the public side, we do see electronic platforms, and it's been years now that we've had the SADI platform here in Ontario. And the wait time for getting those prior authorizations submitted or special authorizations is same day, next day. It's
Wow,
long if it takes more than a day to get these drugs. So that's
that's
the new
amazing.
norm for years now, is just you submit electronically. It tracks all of your submissions. You can do them the renewals immediately as well. and it's been going great for years. It took a decade to put together, but that's where we see the innovation. From my
Yeah,
perspective, it's on the public side
public,
now.
which is quite shocking, really, because usually they're the last to the party.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And I just to pick up on your point, I mean, that really is true electronic prior authorization. I mean, the prior authorization that we're talking about right now and that's outlined in the guide is just a transaction. It's the insurance company is still looking at that drug, but it's just a transaction. It's getting that completed claim form completed electronically and then electronically submitted to the insurer, but there's still a manual review process. I would venture to say that GLP-1s on the private side may be the first drugs that are true EPA, which is they're adjudicated electronically based on algorithms that are put into the system. And some may spit out and have to have a manual review, but most of them would be adjudicated electronically based on the criteria that the payer has in their systems. So that is true EPA, where there's a dialogue back and forth between the systems in real time, and there's that online adjudication. That's not realistic for all claims, prior auth claims or special auth claims, but it sounds like Ontario has kind of shown us how it should be done.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, and needless to say, if anybody has a direct line to whoever's in charge of prior auth in the Ministry of Health, then let me know, or Ontario Health, let me know, because I'll be knocking on their door to become a member. So Alan, you might know somebody there that you can help me out, because I said we're just at the beginning stages of reaching out to payers. So
Yeah.
Kim, what about yourself? Would you agree with Alan that the public side's dramatically improved, at least in Ontario, and I think BC has done some good work,
Yeah.
but nothing really on the
Alberta.
private side.
Yeah, I
Alberta's
mean,
getting better. Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it was rather shocking to us when we were seeing, people with private insurance go more slowly through the system than the public payers. Again, it's one of these things where if the private sector is looking at adopting elements of, the public system, there are some jurisdictions that are doing this really well. And that get patients through very quickly. And then at least the patients know their fate. Am I
yeah,
going to be covered? Am I not going to be covered? What's the next step?
yeah.
So yeah, I absolutely echo what Alan has said.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, because at least if people know that, I mean, it's not great news, but if they know they're not eligible, they're not covered, either it's not on the formulary or it's just that they don't meet that particular insurer's criteria, at least they then can discuss other treatment options with their physician. But if they're left hanging for 6 weeks, which I know is not the case in every case privately, but if they are left hanging for 6 to 8 weeks, and there's a lot of back and forth with further information and questions, that can easily happen. Then they're left in limbo, and nobody wants to be in limbo. We don't have any questions from the audience, which I'm kind of surprised at. So, but anyway, I've got lots, and I think, we've still got everybody on the line, so they're obviously interested in what we're discussing. I'd like to go to you, Gavin, because you're dealing with this on a day-to-day basis. And one of my kind of pitches, I guess, to advisors, and I'm anxious to get out there and, I know we've got some people from some fairly large advisory groups, and just so you know, I'm available and I'm free. Okay, so I'm happy to sit with and present to advisor groups and their consultants and their staff about this initiative and about the prior authorization environment. I did that recently with NFP. Do you think it's a good pitch to engage advisors and say, look, this is a way to, look at payers and say, are you doing better in prior authorization? This is one of the things that you should be asking insurers when you go to market or at renewal. Are you a member? Do you support the guiding principles? And in the future, later this year, are you accredited? Do you plan to be accredited? Are you in the process? So do you think that that's a good pitch for advisors? Because sometimes insurers are a little hesitant to make changes unless advisors and plan sponsors say, come on, we need this.
Yeah, I mean, so our job is really to find a balance of cost and care and to protect our clients and advise them to make good decisions. And I'd say that this becomes really heightened through a change of carrier. And our E&O is ultimately on the line. If we say something is the same, it's hard, really hard. Is it really the same?
You don't know.
You can grandfather some high cost drugs from one carrier to another, but can you grandfather that drug has been approved for all the indications from one care over another? That's a black box right now.
Or are your patients that are approved or your plan members who are approved, is that drug still going to be approved or do they have to reapply?
Sure. So, I mean, there's lots of ways that a changing carrier can blow up, and it's certainly the larger you go, and in the mid to large size market, you feel like you have a little bit of control. But I mean, if you deal in the ultra large, I mean, this stuff can hit the news, right? All of a sudden, I got a new card, and I show up, and I can't get my medication, right? And that's like the worst case scenario for any corporation. And so I think. And just to go back to your last question on has the landscape changed, the admin size hasn't changed, but the environment in which we're working has changed drastically, right? We've got less doctors, more people without a family doctor, right? Some of these people can't even get in and they're meeting someone for the first time saying, hey, can you fill out this form? And so the other side of it is what's the quality of the documentation? And so I've been, and we're not talking about a $50,000 drug. We were dealing with a carrier who was prior authing like $1,000 drug, and and his
Yeah,
pills, and I've got a heart condition patient saying I can't get this medication, I can't afford
yeah,
it. And this, I've
yeah,
got a few stories where I'm showing up to the pharmacy and putting down a credit card because my
wow,
name is on the plan, and
yeah,
I had to do that once or twice because it's if I
yeah,
don't, they're not buying their drugs, and so
yeah,
I think when we tie our name to making a recommendation, you should go with this carrier. There's no change in coverage. Um, I think there's a lot of risk for us when making more risk for us than we've ever had, frankly, in recommending a change.
yeah,
And if we had a system where we could say this prior auth list is the exact same as that prior auth list, like that would give me a lot more peace of mind in recommending a change to a client and not having to reapply, not having to go back to a doctor. The data is already there. You're going to have a synchronized decision flow no matter where they are, as long as you're in that same third party system. I mean, I
yeah,
love the idea of having the peace of mind knowing something's not going to blow up in my face the first month of the new plan, right?
yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think I mean, there definitely are limitations to the prior auth framework. So we can't guarantee, that when you change carrier, the coverage is going to be the same and it's going to be fully transparent, the drug plan formulary. That would, in an ideal world, that would be great, but we can't do that. But I think what we can do is at least give that, certification or acknowledgement that that payer agrees with those guiding principles, that they are following some really good standards or good practices for administration and communication. And that certainly in that grandfathering over, as long as that drug is covered under the new formulary, that drug is actually going to be continued to be reimbursed. But you're right. I mean, having, it's one thing when you have a GLP-1 and you've got very high numbers, which, is understandably requiring prior authorization. But when you've got a drug that's $1,000 for an ongoing heart condition and the carrier changes and you don't have that coverage anymore, it's a problem. So I don't want to sit here and say PAFA is going to solve every problem with the prior authorization process and formulary management, but we're certainly going to help, socialize and recognize those that, agree to certain rules of engagement, I should say, on the process and practices within prior authorization.
Yeah,
Hey,
and I'll
Denise, I
just
just
I'll
want
just
to,
add the other part of it is there's I mean 2% of people are on a prior auth claim. That number is not going down; it's going up. and it ticks
Yeah.
along every single year. And when you're in larger firms, like there are always going to be people having to go through this process. And um, I don't want to use the metaphor, but it's like having power windows in your car. Like you're just never going to go back to going and rolling down. Like it's just that's going to be the norm once all carriers have this. Or if I mean if the, I mean I'm kind of sitting on the edge of my seat here to see what Green Shield does with this. Um,
Yeah.
so if I have
I think we
alerts
all are.
with Green Shield and all of a sudden we're using this and what a breath of fresh air. Like why would
Yeah.
that company go back to paper after
Yeah.
having this type of experience?
Oh, I think for sure once Green Shield is live, uh, and probably there already is in the background that we don't know about. But I think once Green Shield is live, then there will definitely be a lot more people putting this up on the top of their to-do list. I think Ellen, you wanted to make a comment.
Yeah, I'm just gonna add about the guidelines of the PAFA and like switching carriers, for example. What I would run into is the patient was switching insurers and the DIN was still covered from one plan to the other, but
Yeah.
the criteria was different, right?
Mhm.
So the patient would be told your drug is covered, all the same DINs are covered by the new plan, but the new plan didn't cover that DIN for that type of cancer, right? So
Right.
I think the PAFA having education provided to people so they're more mindful of situations like that. It's not enough to just look at the DINs are the same, but are the criteria for all those drugs also the same? So just bringing more
Yeah.
awareness.
Yeah, and it's hard to really know that because unfortunately, criteria is something that is a closely guarded secret. So
Mhm.
but as an advisor, I think, yeah, it's a heads up that if you've, I think, as I said, there will be some change, I think, at an industry level outside of PAFA, on change of carrier, same formulary to same formulary. Um, uh, Now, once that, initial approval expires, and the person has to resubmit if there's a different criteria, they're still going to get caught in that space. So it may be something to, that you may be able to do something about as an advisor, and it may not. That may be one of the risks still associated with the process. But the criteria is a hands off for PAFA and SPA. So, and I totally get that. So I think we're just about at the end of our time. I do like to finish on time. So I would just like to give each of our panelists an opportunity to, say some parting words. I think maybe what you would like attendees to take away from this session would be a good one. So maybe I'll start with you, Alan, because you're the first on my screen here.
Sure. I would say after this to go through the white paper, read through the program guidelines, sit down with your teams and talk about it. See how you can partake with this, things that you can learn from this. But take something away from this meeting. Don't just join this session, but actually sit down and review it afterwards and let's make this happen.
Yeah, sounds good. And Kim, you're next on my screen.
Sure, I just say thanks and get in on this. The patients that you serve really need this type of collaboration and coordination to improve their experience around prior authorization. So, big seal of approval. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim. And Gavin.
Just say to the other consultants in the room, um, I think this part of our industry is ripe for modernization, and that I mean Denise and the OKRX platforms of the world have their work cut out for them. They're going to be going to all the insurance companies saying, "Hey, you should be a part of this. You should invest in updating your systems." Which I think the gut reaction will be the insurance companies saying, "Why should we do this? How do we make money?" It's really up to us as consultants to create the demand that we want to put business with carriers who are investing in this and making the lives of our plan members easier, making our lives easier, and improving the health outcomes of our clients, which is ultimately our main job. So I don't think this is something we just sort of watch and see if it happens. I think we should be asking insurers if you really want these juicy prospects, what are you doing to make everyone's lives easier? Are you looking at EPA? And this is important
Yeah.
to us and my clients. So I think we we play a very vital role in something like this coming to the industry.
That's great. I think that's a really great note to end on, Gavin, and definitely want to give a shout out to advisors, particularly to move on this and call me. Please register for session 2 and session 3. I'll be doing my work on getting another presentation and two ready for you. And happy, as I said, to meet with your organizations and share more about the work we're doing and answering your specific questions. So thanks everybody for being here. I've got a couple of nice thank you notes. I hope I didn't talk too quickly. I have a habit of doing that, and I hope you'll reach out to me if you have any questions at all. And thanks again to our panelists, Kim, Gavin, and Alan. Great work. Thanks for being with us, and thanks for all your time, effort, and year basically through this process over the last few years. So thanks again, everybody, and look for the evaluation. Take care. Bye-bye.